you like to leave your coat?
Yes, it's grown warmer.
This is a pleasant surprise. I wasn't expecting you till tomorrow.
Well, I got your message at Fort William before I started back for Inverness.
Oh, yes.
Well, what's the case?
She's a crofter's wife about 7 miles from here. This is the history.
And?
My first diagnosis was an ovarian cyst, but I didn't like the look of it. And my next thought was that the sooner I called in a specialist, the better.
Has strangulation set in?
That's just what I'm afraid of. Well, we'd better be going on our way.
I'm ready.
I have the car round at the back. Good afternoon, nurse. I brought Dr. Wright with me.
How'd you do?
Good afternoon, Doctor.
And how's the patient?
Oh, she's had a restless night, but she's a bit easier today. She's been fretting herself about Dr. Wright here, coming all that way from Inverness.
Oh, that's all right now, Mrs. MacDonald. It was I who asked Dr. Wright to come over. Don't you be worrying about that. I want him to examine you.
Well, Mrs. MacDonald? You're right, she's pretty far advanced. But if we can get her to hospital at once, we've a pretty good chance.
Well, Stornoway is about 5 hours away by boat and road.
That would mean starting off along the road we came.
It would. What about the air ambulance? We can send her down to Glasgow.
Fine if it can be done.
Oh, yes, it can be done. It's been to the island before.
That's the thing. What about her husband?
Yes, if we're taking her to Glasgow, we must consult him. Nurse, where's MacDonald?
He isn't back yet from the fishing. He thought it'd be tomorrow you'd come. But he shouldn't be long now.
Let's make the arrangements anyway.
I can tell MacDonald when he comes in.
That's good, and I'll have a word with him later. We'd better be going down to the post office. We've got to wire Glasgow for the air ambulance, and we'll need to advise the hospital as well. Will you get your bag packed, nurse, and be ready to go?
When will you be back, Doctor?
It'll take about 2 hours for the plane to get here by the time we've sent off the wire. We should be back with the stretcher in about 2.5 hours.
About 5:30.
Very good, then.
Cigarette?
Thanks, I have a pipe. Well, since the aeroplane is coming, I might as well go back in it. That'll be all right, won't it?
Certainly. It's your quickest way to Inverness.
Yes, thanks.
You haven't been long in the north.
3 years. I was in a London hospital when this vacancy turned up. You know, I'm an Edinburgh man, but even so, the Highlands and Islands medical scheme wasn't much more than a name to me.
Well, now that you've seen it working, what do you think of it?
Seems to me there's a great future for subsidized medical services like this one. Well, take today. Mrs. MacDonald gets your services, a specialist, and an air ambulance to take her 200 miles to hospital. In fact, she's just as well off as a patient in town who has everything on her doorstep.
It was a different story when I came here first. I over 30 years ago. I used to look at that map and wonder if a way would ever be found to attract enough doctors to the Highlands and Islands to make it possible for the people there to get medical attention as easily and cheaply as the people in the south. It's a problem. A fifth of the land area of Scotland with so few people living in it. And those scattered like threepenny bits in a Christmas pudding. And we're just a handful of doctors with our patients maybe miles away in isolated crofts and townships. It's often 30 miles to see one patient, a day's journey there and back. And they're poor too, farmers and fisher folk. You can't charge them what it costs you, they just haven't the money. But there is someone got to look after the folks in the Highlands and out here in the islands, even if it does mean a bit of a struggle. It's a problem. The Dewar Committee. I wonder now what a committee can do. Investigating the problems of the medical service in the Highlands and Islands. Well, let them come, and good luck to them. We'll tell them the problem's all right. I only hope they can find the remedies.
And what have you to tell us, Dr. MacWilliam?
I expect you'll have heard what I'm going to tell you from many of my colleagues. My greatest problem is the time and money it takes to reach the half of my patients. For most visits I use a trap. It's a slow way of travelling over our roads, but it's better than walking where there are no roads. Then I have patients across the loch. To get to them, I have to take a boat. You see the trouble. Journeys like these take so much time and cost us so much in hire of boats and traps that we have to charge a pretty stiff fee, even just to cover our expenses. And my practice is no exception. There is one doctor out from here who has fords to cross on some visits. If the tide's low enough, he takes a trap. If it's full, he goes by boat. And if it's half in between, well, he just has to sit and wait. We can none of us afford motor cars. And even if we had them, road conditions are so bad we couldn't use them half the time. It's the same for the district nurses too. Most of them travel by bicycle or walk. There are so few of them and they just can't get round their districts. And if we have trouble in reaching our patients, you can imagine the trouble they have in getting in touch with us. Post offices with telephones are few and far between, and in some places signals are the only means of communication between the doctor on the mainland and his patients on the island.
Have you any other difficulties?
In the larger towns, we have a few hospitals, but most of the communities are so isolated that it's often impossible to send a patient into hospital over the bad roads. It usually means that we just have to operate the best way we can. There was one appendix I did in a hut. There was the schoolmaster to give chloroform. and all we had for light was a tallow candle held by the man's neighbour. If there's to be a future for these people, we must have a proper medical service. Yes, we certainly gave them something to think about.
So you are really one of the reasons why we have the Highlands and Islands medical scheme today.
Oh, well, I wouldn't be saying that. Anyway, the result of the Juror Committee's report was a grant from the government. They made an annual grant. Yes, here we are. For the purpose of improving medical services, including nursing, in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, and otherwise providing and improving means for the prevention, treatment, and alleviation of illness and suffering therein.
Well, that seems to cover almost everything. That's the end of the story.
In a way, it's only the beginning. And the story that starts there makes more pleasant telling. I'll not be boring you.
By no means. It's interesting to hear it at first hand.
Well, when the grant had been definitely approved, the first job was to attract new doctors to the area. One of the first uses of the grant was to bring each doctor's income up to a level he could live on. In other words, he didn't have to depend on the people being able to pay him. And the people in turn only had to pay a small fee when they needed a doctor, instead of enough to cover his expenses. So the doctor was consulted more frequently. People's health improved and both doctors and patients benefited. We were able to afford cars under the new arrangement. And as the roads were improved, we could get round to our patients more easily. Now we could visit 3 patients in the time it used to take to see 1. Then the nursing associations got money from the grant to appoint more nurses, and well-qualified ones at that. After a while, many of them were provided with cars too. We began to have better telephone and telegraph services. New houses were built for us and for the nurses. The better roads made it possible to use ambulances more widely, and our key hospitals were enlarged to receive the patients we were now able to send them. They were equipped with up-to-date apparatus for all modern treatments, and resident specialists were appointed. Then, at the beginning of the war, the emergency medical service hospitals were organized to receive possible casualties. They meant extra accommodation, and they used some of their empty beds to take our patients off the waiting lists. And that brings us right up to date.
Why, man, you've jumped a couple of centuries in a few years.
From farm cart to air ambulance.
And it could never have happened if it hadn't been backed by the state.
Aye, if anyone had told me 30 years ago that I would be telegraphing for specialists and for aeroplanes, well, I would have warned him to keep away from the bottle. Though mind you, we are not out of the wood yet. There are still lots of things to be done.
Well, you seem to be the kind of man to do them.
It's really a young man's job out here. I would have retired before this if it hadn't been for the war.
I wonder.
Ah, well, it's time we were going anyway. I'll get the stretcher. All ready, nurse?
Yes, Doctor.
Has MacDonald come in?
Yes, he's here now.
And he agrees, does he?
Aye, whatever you think best, Doctor.
Oh, hello, MacDonald. This is Dr. Wright.
How'd you do?
I'm glad you came, Doctor. Will she be all right?
Of course she will. She'll be back with you in 3 weeks.
And when will I know for sure?
Well, nurse will telephone Dr. McWilliam from Glasgow.
Thank you, Doctor. Dat be cúrum sin bíhast a gúr. Bit a cast go leor.
Cleaver.
Well, all ready now, Mrs. MacDonald? Who's helping with the stretcher, nurse?
I've got Ian Campbell waiting outside.